Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at spiritual warfare from an Old Testament perspective. And the Old is not as rich as the New in terms of detailed doctrinal descriptions of the nature of our warfare, but it does provide us with examples of victors, personal victors, and their struggles and their triumphs over the three enemies of our faith. And so what we're going to be doing is examining the life of three figures of the faith, Noah, Daniel, and Job, in that order, and showing, hopefully illustrating to you what we can learn from them about how to emerge triumphant over the world, the flesh, and the devil, respectively. So the passage we're going to proceed from is Ezekiel. The foundational passage we're going to proceed from is in Ezekiel 14. We're going to open with verse 13, which reads, "Son of man, when the land sins against me to commit a trespass, and I shall stretch out my hand against it, and cut off its supply of bread, and send famine on it, and cut man and beast from it, even though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness, declares the Master Yahweh." So he's addressing an Old Testament audience which is currently in the exile in Babylon, and he's speaking of national judgment, and he's telling them, he's addressing an Old Testament audience, there is no vicarious righteousness. So these three figures who endure as models of and one of them was contemporary, Noah, Daniel, and Job. Daniel was a contemporary of Ezekiel's. But we'll discuss him in greater detail as we attend to it. But just to connect it to the doctrine of no vicarious righteousness, we who have the richer understanding of the new covenant know that apart from his righteousness, we are not saved, but it is his gift to us, and it makes us all qualified for heaven, because we cannot expect to go there on our own righteousness. But these men were exemplary models of righteousness as humanly understood. "Even though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, declares the Master Yahweh, they would deliver neither son nor daughter. They would deliver their own lives by their righteousness." So a man's righteousness, his character, and his moral quality is sufficient only for himself at the day of judgment. We cannot leech on to, I believe, a lot of Catholics in their cult of sainthoods. They believe that certain saints have done sufficient works that they can transfer over onto the account of less productive saints, but there's no merit in that argument. But why these three figures? And I earlier mentioned there are three enemies in our warfare. Every Christian has them: the world, the flesh, and the devil, the latter of which is constantly trying to manipulate the middle of which to conform to the first. So at the heart and center, Satan is the enemy object and our enemy. He's the one who uses, even when we're born again, we have redeemed hearts and redeemed minds and redeemed spirits, but our flesh remains unredeemed, and within it is the appetite and inclination to succumb to fleshly and worldly indulgences. So the world literally all around us is a giant temptation screen, and temptation is, of course, connected to Satan. That is his ministry. And these three figures, Noah triumphed over the world, Daniel triumphed over the flesh, and Job triumphed over Satan. Now, as we connected in the tail end, we'll explain why they didn't just triumph over that, but that was the center of their battles. So we're going to open with Noah, who overcame the world, with Genesis 5, chapter 6, verse 5 and 8. "And Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahweh was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And Yahweh said, I am going to wipe off man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping creature, and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh." So the conditions in which the world was in with flood. Now, the world itself is not evil. The planet Earth is not evil. It was declared good upon its pristine creation. So what happened is that the men who inhabit the world contaminate it and make them evil. And in the pre-Diluvian period, the hearts and imaginations of men were continually wicked. That means they didn't rest. It was their default state of mind. Now, when we have wicked thoughts, even born-again believers do, but these are very much the exception in our thought life. But these men were continually motivated and inclined towards the inclinations of their own wicked hearts. They were a morally depraved society, deemed only fit to be exterminated by Yahweh, but one man catches the notice and attention of him. So Yahweh has perfect supervision. He is omniscient and omnipresent. That means he takes notice, and he understands everything about everyone in the universe better than they understand themselves. And he knew that this man was worth saving, because he didn't want to. The idea of him eliminating his human creation was anathema to his loving purpose. But in this there wasn't many human life forms left worth preserving, but this one man and his family, through whom humanity replenished the earth. So his victory over the world sustained the world as it is, but he had to overcome worldly temptations that we'll discuss on verses 11 through 13. And the earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with violence. And Elohim looked upon the earth, and saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So everywhere he looks on the earth, there is violence, there is filth, there is moral pollution. It is deemed corrupt, and it was from its creative purpose and pristine form. And all flesh, so flesh is an element in worldly warfare. These three enemies, flesh, world, and devil, are always interconnected in the nature of our struggle. But the entire world, once more, we get the picture that at this time it is completely corrupt, at least everyone in it, except Noah, and he's the one who's going to be preserved. Verse 17. And see, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth, to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life from under the heavens. All that is on the earth is to die. So he's pronouncing a universal death sentence over every land-dwelling creature and bird in the sky. He's had enough, and humanity was the only one who was responsible, because animals cannot sin. We can, and we were living worse than the animals because we have viceful potential and sinful potential, so we were diminishing the created order more thoroughly than the other animals, and these were the ones to whom he had been given stewardship over. So if he wasn't going to preserve us, he wasn't going to preserve them. He had enough. He was going to, just end this experiment called human life. And 22, and Noah did according to all Elohim commanded him. So he did. So he's given instructions, that he gives the prophecy that he's going to eliminate the earth with a giant flood. They had never seen rain at this time, because we read in Genesis 2:5 that the earth was replenished by sprouting. The water and replenishing nutrients came from the earth itself before rain fell. So no one in the world had seen anything like this. Here was a strange man building a strange boat in the middle of land, and the whole world is lost in its wickedness. But Noah used that boat as his preaching platform, as we read. So Hebrews 11:7. By faith, Noah, having been warned of what was yet unseen, having feared, prepared an ark to save his house, through which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So he condemned the world. He invited them to come into the ark of safety, but they were going their own way, doing their own thing, and the world pointed and thought him foolish, but they were not left to laugh, even though they were laughing at him when they saw him building this incomprehensible project in an unstrategic location. He's not anywhere near water. But, they weren't left to laugh when the flood came down, when there was water and everyone in it, every life form drowned. And so his righteousness was established by faith, but expressed in obedience. 2 Peter 2:5. Actually 2:4. For if Yahweh did not spare the angels who sinned, but sent them to Gan Haman, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the world of old, but preserved Noah, a proclaimer of righteousness, and 7 others, bringing the flood in the world of the wicked. So the flood was sent for the world of the wicked. It was to blot out all the iniquitous elements that were outside of these 8 people, this one man and his family who had determined and deemed fit to preserve was distinct from the otherwise universal flood. And, this was part of his plan. It was to eliminate and blot out the earth of all its iniquitous elements and preserve what was right and what was good and what he had to be proud of for having created humanity. So Noah made Yahweh proud because the entire world, which is totally subsumed by sin, the thoughts of men were continually evil. There was this one man who was not corrupted by the completely corrupt world around him, and he had a family, and he saw through them the future of humanity. Everyone else, their day of grace had expired, and Noah stood on this boat preaching to them, inviting them into the ark of safety. They tragically neglected to heed the call. We're going to turn to Genesis 8, verses 13, 14. And Yahweh did according to the... Whoops, wrong book. Sorry. Where were we? 13, 14. Okay. And it came to be in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and saw the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. So the earth, the world which he had battled against and was saw fit to preserve human life thereon, was cleansed and inhabitable at this point. So for a while it wasn't. There was this flood, the likes of which the world had never seen anything like and has never seen anything since. So it's an unprecedented and unduplicated experience. And eventually you read that Yahweh gives Noah the promise that he would never wipe out the earth by this means again. So 21:22. And Yahweh smelled a soothing fragrance, and Yahweh said in his heart, Never again shall I curse the ground because of man, although the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth, and never again smite all life as I have done. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and winter and summer, and days and nights shall not cease. Now, human nature hasn't changed since the flood. Our thoughts are still continually oriented towards evil. Much of the world and the people who collectively comprise it, their thoughts are only oriented towards self, and that is a species of evil, and it just seems like evil is expanding exponentially in our present generation. So we have to take a stand, because this is also connected to the end times of what we're going to read after what we read in the 9th chapter. But as long as the earth remains, as long as it is in motion, he's going to not discontinue the life as it goes on until the final day of judgment, where he comes in fire. And the first verse of the 9th chapter, And Elohim blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, Bear fruit and increase, and fill the earth. As for you, bear fruit and increase, bring forth teemingly in the earth and increase in it. So they're giving a command to multiply and replenish the earth and restore it and make it whole. But what's instructive for our generation to contemplate is the Savior's own warnings as given in Matthew 24:37 through 39, which read, And as the days of Noah, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as they were in the days before the flood, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So the whole world that was laughing at Noah and what wasn't left to laugh around at him anymore, they had no expectation of the catastrophe that was to come. Noah was given the express warning from Yahweh that he was going to exterminate the earth unless they repent, and he stood on that ark using it as a preaching podium to lure others into the ark of safety. They were too self-concerned, too self-interested, and too motivated continually by evil to heed the calling. And much that's going to happen when he comes. A lot of people, they scoff at the notion. I've heard it said, kind of a crude joke, but the second coming is the world's longest orgasm. He's been coming for 2,000 years, but it's going to come someday soon, and it's going to come someday suddenly, so we have to be watchful and mindful of the signs of the times and their unfolding, and be ready for that blessed day. Daniel is the next figure. Remember, in Ezekiel, they are mentioned in the order in which I personally believe they were selected for. So Daniel was triumphed over the flesh, and we read of this early encounter in the first chapter, verses 8 through 16. But Daniel laid it upon his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's food, nor with the wine which he drank. So he asked of the chief of the eunuchs not to defile himself. And Elohim granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief of the eunuchs. But the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my master the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would make my head guilty before the king. And Daniel said to the overseer, whom was the chief of the eunuchs, had put over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please try your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let their appearances be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's food, and do with your servants as you see fit. And he listened to them in this matter, and he tried them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their appearances looked better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's food. And it came to pass that the overseer took away their portion of food and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. So they took a stand for the Mosaic dietary standards. They were transplanted in a foreign land, cropped up to be the king's servants and attendants. And Daniel, of course, advances diplomatically, takes his stand without compromising his trustworthiness, and so he offers them to give him an experience. He uses the good grace of the chief of the overseers, with whom he had cultivated a good enough relationship with, to allow him to consent to this experiment where they were going to observe their Mosaic dietary law. They were going to keep on feeding the other people in captivity what the king's delicacies, the king's dinings, and we are going to look healthier than that. And that's how they earn their trust, and they recognize that there is something special. In the next verse we read that they were given knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams. But the 21st verse is our next one. And Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. This takes us to the 6th chapter of the same book, where Daniel has to take a stand. So a lot of Daniel is prophecies, and we read that his friends, better known by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, take a stand in the 3rd chapter when they're summoned to worship the golden statue of Nebuchadnezzar. All others bow while they remain tall. And this is, we read of why these conspirators plotted to do what they did. We're going to read the first 5 verses. And pleased Darius to appoint over the kingdom 120 viceroys to be over all the kingdom, over them 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, so that these viceroys should give account to them, and the king suffer no less. Then Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and viceroys, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over all the kingdom. Then the governors and the viceroys sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they were unable to find occasion or corruption, because he was steadfast, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his Elah. So the Persian Empire was a vast apparatus. There were some 127 provinces. Eventually, that's the number I'm familiar with, but at this time there are 120 viceroys. These are local supervisors of a respective region of the empire, which really belongs to one man. That's Darius. He's the one at the top. And Daniel ascends to the top of the organization. He is the prime minister because his virtues are best. He is honest. He has integrity. He has extreme competence. And these corrupt courtiers kind of he's poaching in on their territory because they had a whole illicit operation of stealing from the king's revenue. So they were motivated by the world and the flesh, and that caused them to lash out at Daniel. And because he never he never sinned, or any no sin could be spoken of him, they had to attack his religion. So that says something a lot. When you cannot be compelled to break the law unless they make it a law to practice your religion. So they manipulate the king into passing something that's going to eliminate his most trusted servant. They flatter him into making himself the sole object of worship for a period of time. But we're going to read verses 10 through 13. And Daniel, when he knew that the writing was signed, went home, and in his upper room, with his window open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his Elah, as he had done before. Then these men tumultuously gathered, and found Daniel praying and entreating before his Elah. Then they approached the king, and spoke concerning the king's interdict. Have you not signed an interdict that every man who petitions any mighty one, or man within 30 days, except you, O king, is thrown into the den of lions? Then the sovereign king answered and said, The word is certain, according to the law of the Midianites and the Persians, which does not pass away. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the sons of the exiles of Judah, pays no heed to you, O king, nor for the interdict that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So Daniel knew this law was in effect, but he was determined to maintain the integrity of his practice. Now, the temple would have been reduced to smithereens, but when Solomon dedicated, it was established in the dialogue that they could always use the direction of the temple, even after it was no longer. When they were in a foreign land, they could pray to it and receive his blessings and graces. So he was not going to allow himself to continue that practice just because these courtiers had schemed. So he had integrity and he had courage because he was willing to pay the price with his life. Daniel was spared the martyr's crown, but just the fact that he was willing to voluntarily lay down his life makes him a willing martyr. And he was spared the martyr's fate, but he certainly wears the martyr's crown. So he triumphed over worldly forces and maintained, and we're actually going to move on to Job now. We had a little more to say to Daniel, but I really want to get everyone in here in 30 minutes. Job triumphed over the devil. The devil was his main antagonist. In the first 2 chapters, we read of the heavenly scene, which Job and his companions, no human on earth is privy to, save the reader of this book. So essentially, Satan challenged Yahweh to allow him to curse and afflict this upright servant named Job. And he challenges, he says he'll curse you to your face if I curse you at your permission. And he says, go ahead. He has enough integrity. He has enough faith in the integrity of this man. So the 2 things he could not take away was his faith and his integrity. He took away the life of his family. He took away his possessions, his livestock. He put skin boils on his faith, but he could not take away his integrity or faith. So we read of Job in the first opening verse of the first chapter in the book which bears his name. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one who feared Elohim and turned away from evil. So his righteous report card is A+. He's perfect, he's upright. He not only embraces the positive value of fearing Elohim, but also has the negative counterbalance of turning away from evil. So he was not liable to succumb to temptation or sin, and he took great extraordinary lengths to provide sacrifices just because his son, in case one of his children on the off chance inadvertently sinned. Then in the 8th verse we read, "And Yahweh said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a perfect and straight man, one who fears Elohim and turns aside from evil?" So Satan scouring the earth, this is his territory, this is his domain. It's been that way ever since Adam ceded and surrendered the territory of the earth to Satan through sin. But he's pointing with pride to heaven that the whole world is enraptured in corruption, much like it was in Noah's day. But here's this one individual who Yahweh is proud of, he points to, and is faithful enough in his faithfulness to allow Satan to afflict him miserably, of which we've already discussed. His family, 10 children are wiped out, and his possessions are stolen, all his agricultural roots. But in the 20th through the 22nd verse of the same chapter, we read, "Then Job rose up and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and did obeisance. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I return there. Yahweh has given, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh." In all this, Job did not sin nor ascribe wickedness unto Elohim. So Satan's entire motive was to get Job to curse Yahweh to his face, but this Job would not do. There was no circumstance or reversal of fortune or sickness that he could be inflicted, or loss of property or possession or family that could compel him. Now he weeps and he mourns. This is the natural response, but his weeping leads to worship. So he knows who to turn to when he has losses in life. The same Yahweh who gave him all that he had is the same one who took it away. He's not going to let a little thing like the fact that he had taken away his great blessings and treasures cause him to curse him who is the author of all blessings. And then we read something similar in the 8th and 10th chapter verse of the next chapter. "And he took a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. And his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse Elohim and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women speak. Indeed, should we accept good from Elohim and not accept evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." So once more, he passed the test. He was given terrible skin boils, which caused him to poke at his skin with rocks just to get these painful sores off. And his wife is telling him to do what most of us would have already done, which was to curse Elohim and die. That was Satan's plan. Job thwarted his purposes by maintaining the integrity that she kind of mocked and belittled. He said, "You a foolish woman, you are surrendering to Satan if you if you say something like that, because when you surrender to sin, you surrender to his domain, and you are out of reach of God, at least for that present moment." But he did not sin with his lips. This was the test. And we're just going to read from one chapter. The remainder of Job consists of dialogues of these 3 comforters, and eventually a 4th adds on, who try and make sense of it. And Job is maintaining his innocence and arguing for his integrity, and implying that Yahweh is unjust in inflicting upon someone who had never personally caused justice. So he asks for a trial in court, but he says something amazing in the 13th chapter, verses 15 through 19. "Though he slay me, I wait, but I show my ways to be right before him. He is also my salvation, for a defiled one does not come before him. Listen closely to my words, and with your ears to what I say. Look, please, I have prepared my case, and I know that I am in the right. Who is he that would strive with me? For then I would keep silent and die." So he's maintained, even if he kills him and gets rid of him, he's not going to curse him. So he is passing the test. That was the one thing, the one restriction that had been imposed on Satan. He could not take his life. He took full advantage of the elasticity of the other mandate. He took the life of his children. But he maintains his innocence to the end. He has comfort and assurance in his source of salvation, and that he would make that blessed abode based on his lack of sin. So even though Job did not suffer because he sinned in his suffering. He succumbed to the sin of self-righteousness in maintaining the idea of his own righteousness to the extent that he accused Yahweh of injustice. But and we just want to close with James 5:11. That's the final verse we have today, and it's right here. See, we call those blessed who endure, and have heard of the endurance of Job, and saw the purpose of Yahweh, that he is very sympathetic and compassionate. So Job survives and endures to the New Testament, much of like what we read with Noah. Daniel is mentioned in the Old Testament, but it's usually in reference to the abomination that he predicted. But Job survives as a matter of endurance and integrity through endurance, because he went through the ringer. He was struggling to make sense with this suffering that had been the acceleration and intensity of it was beyond anything we can relate to. But we'd like to say more, but that's unfortunately all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.